Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Welcome aboard. Oops, that's what happens when you don't focus on what you're doing. Welcome aboard sailing vessel Aisling. This is the boat that my family and I own, and we are living aboard, or have been for the last 4 years. I'm finally getting down to one of the bigger projects, which is to redo all of the seating area in the doghouse. It's all pretty bad, unfortunately. The teak is pretty much unredeemable. I am going to glass over, fair and paint this entire area and make it a little neater looking. The entire starboard side, where I'm working now, is going to get a good going over with some 80 grit on my orbital sander. Then I've got to go over it with some thickened epoxy and fill out a bunch of cracks and holes and areas where old screws were removed from the previous owner. It's really not worth the expense and the time and the effort to try to maintain this teak, so I've taken the rather drastic approach. I'm going to cover it all up with very thick fiberglass. This footage was recorded a couple of months ago. I hadn't really figured out where to put cameras yet, and I didn't have a proper way to mount the camera. So I have a mount on the roof. Apologies for my butt crack every now and again. But anyway, let's get back to sanding. Okay, first pass of sanding done. Everything's going to get a wipe down with some acetone. It dries pretty quickly, as you can see. It's drying almost as fast as I'm putting it on, and get all of that dust off. And then I'll mix up some thickened epoxy. The epoxy I'm using here is from a company called Gurit, and it's amperage 30 resin, and I think here I'm using the fast hardener. I thicken it up with some filled fumed silica and give it a good mix, and then start applying it into all of the various cracks. I think I'm only going to do the one side here, so that I've still got a path that I can walk in and out of the boat from. Then I'll come back to that after the other side is dry. Okay, it's been a few hours later and it's now dry. I can mix up the next batch. This will all get sanded, and then I'll go and get the glass and we'll glass the whole section of the bench. I've already done the aft side and the port side off camera, probably a couple of weeks before this was filmed. I like to use a tongue depressor for this. It's very good for mixing, and then I can just use the straight edge to fill all of those various holes and cracks and spaces. Some of the area where the caulking would have been in is exposed. I didn't want to fill that with more rubber and then do glass work on top of that, so I figured I'd sand it all down, pull anything loose out, and then fill it with thickened epoxy. This will give me a very good base to put the fiberglass on. Alright, so I've done all of that and it's actually a little tacky. I decided not to sand it and put this on, let it hold in place, use the tackiness to tap it all down, measure and cut the fiberglass. So this is a triaxle, very thick cloth. I think it's a 850 gram triaxle, really decent. I used it to repair some really bad delamination on the keel a couple of months earlier, and I might have some footage of that, or I might have some pictures of that. If I do, I'll include them. If I can't find them, sorry. Cut it all up, make sure that I can get around the winch area and mix up some thickened epoxy and start pouring it in. Well, not so thickened. I think I used some thickened epoxy around the edges, and the rest is a laminating resin, LR30, also from Gura and A&T Products here in Cape Town, and it soaks through and wets out very, very nicely. I like to use a brush for this, pour it on and then pull it along and use the brush to pull the little air pockets out. I do have a few proper tools, but I've discovered I just get a much better fit and a much better lamination when I use a brush and go over each area, and I work the bubbles out towards the seated edge so that there aren't any left. It just works best for me. Other people might have different ways of doing it, but it works really well. In total, I think I mixed 250 mils of epoxy resin. I think that was just about enough to wet out the entire cloth. Again, this is an 850 gram triaxle, so it takes quite a bit to soak it in. It's a bit like a sponge more than it is anything, but it works really well and it's left a very nice hard finish. There should be no more flexing, there should be no more leaks, that being the most important part. So here I've also used the fast hardener on the laminating resin, and it works really quickly. I think probably about 2 hours it's tacky, but won't leave a fingerprint. After about 3 hours or so I can probably already step over it. All the same, I won't sand it until the next day, and this is the next day. Pretty much the same process as I did on the port and aft side. Go over with an AT grit and scuff up the ambient blush on it, take that shine off, because I'm going to wipe that all down, and then I'm going to start fairing. I want to make sure that I have a very tight bond between the fairing and the lamination. I think on the edges where I overlapped the two bits of glass on the aft section and on the port side, I actually used a 40 grit disc to sand that down a little bit because it's quite thick. I probably went through about 4 or 5 discs. So here it all gets wiped down. Acetone on a clean cloth, well, relatively clean cloth. I've been using this cloth throughout the project. I don't think it's clean anymore, but it'll do. Alright, fairing time, and I may as well mix it right on the surface. I'm not too impressed with this particular fairing compound. It's called Pro Fair, and it's mixed at 4:1 or 100 to 25 by weight. I don't like it. If you mix it too fast, it makes bubbles which you can't really sand out. If you mix it too slow, it never mixes properly. If you use a palette knife to try and squish it together, you end up with an uneven mix. So I kind of mix it a little bit using a stirring stick, and then I mix it using the palette. I kind of get more or less a fair consistency. You apply very, very little pressure and just smooth it out. So the initial pass is to get it on, and the second pass is to smooth it out. You're barely putting any pressure on the palette, you're just pulling it along. This is probably not even the correct thing to use, but it's actually used for doing drywalling, and it's sort of a rubber or plastic compound, and it works really, really well to give it a good consistency. But as I'm to find out a little bit later, it doesn't sand very well. My preferred choice is something called S-Fair 6000, and it's also from Gurit, and it's much more akin to something like a Total Boat fairing system, which is way out of my price range here in Cape Town. But this had to do because I had 5 liters of it, and well, it had to go somewhere. So I'm just going to do this side, the aft side of the starboard side of the bench, because I still need to be able to get in and out of the boat. And then I'll start cleaning up all of the junk that I've had to move around. The entire boat's become a bit of a work area. I can still step on and off, and I will start working on the aft side bench. First things first though, I need to do some sanding, and let's find a battery. There we go, that one looks good. It really is a mess. Let's see if I can film and sand at the same time, one-handed. This is the kind of quality programming you'll get on my channel. So here I'm using a 60 grit, definitely works a lot better than an 80 grit. I can sand off the leading edge that I didn't cut properly, which is fine. And I can sand the blush off the epoxy and give it a very good bonding surface. But it does take a long time. I know I've sped up a lot of this footage. I think all in all this was a total week's worth of work. And back to the fairing. I think this is just about the last bit of fairing left of this gross fairing that I don't like. It also feels like powder. If you touch it in your hands, it feels like a powdery substance. It's not very good. I don't think I'll get it again. It's very cheap though, and I think that's why people buy it and why they sell them in such large quantities. But same process. Put a lump on, stretch the lump across, and then just very, very, very gently smooth over the edges. And I think this is just about all I can do in a week. So next week I'll continue on with a bit of paint work. I'll see you all then. Thank you so much for joining me. Please like, please subscribe, tell everybody else to join my channel, and I'll see you then. Bye everyone.